We're very fortunate to have two of our associate editors here, and you've probably seen their names when they send you a request. Mary-alyne Hughes is a clinical associate professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I'm sure she'll say a little bit more about herself later, but she's here, she's pretty much in charge of this session, and I'm going to run out shortly after they get started to go check on student posters and whatnot. But also here is Mike Wischnowski, who is also, are you full now? Are you
Still associate.
Okay,
Yeah.
still associate. He is an associate professor at St. John Fisher in New York. And then also here is an assistant professor now at Eastern Illinois University, Bernadette Laumann, who is one of our reviewers who we always depend on. And every time she submits one review, and apparently another one pops into her mailbox immediately, like the day after.
It's the day
That's
after.
how good she is.
That's amazing how
It's
many,
amazing
how
many
people know I've submitted and I
yeah,
think
and then because then she finally emailed me, she says, "Oh, is there a way for this this thing to let you know that I just finished one review? Can I take a break?" But that's how good she is. And so we're really excited that they're here. But Mary-alyne and Bernie have prepared a lot of information that I know will be very useful to you. Mike, you're here to support and provide insights as well. If you don't know, Mike is doing a session immediately after with Mary-alyne and Sharon Darling on writing for YEC. So I'm hoping that by reviewing my manuscripts, that in the very near future, many of you will be writing also for YEC. So try to go to that session if you can, because that's where some of the critical elements of what good manuscripts look like, for what kinds of things that we look for in YEC manuscripts. That's where they'll be talking about that, as well as some of, like I think I mentioned this yesterday, some of the things that people don't tell you about when you're dealing with editors or associate editors or who knows. There's just some etiquette issues that nobody will tell you about, and Mike will tell you what to do and what you shouldn't do, because in many ways it really affects sometimes how your manuscript flows through the system. So, Mary-alyne?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Ellie.
Just no, it's not here for a second.
First of all, I hope none of you are going to try to get back to the East Coast. How many of you think you might be here a few days? No? Okay. Well, well, we're happy to have you here. Glad you could make it. This is very informal, and I was just kind of looking around. I want to make sure that we have enough chairs for everybody. So, I don't know, Lori, if you see that we get a bunch more people, do you think maybe you could go to another room so you could pull in more chairs?
I will probably just grab some.
Okay,
So if
great.
you don't mind me opening
No,
the door.
that'd be great. So, not really going to say anything else. I mean, Ami did a nice introduction, I think, for Mike, myself, and Bernie. So maybe to start off, tell us who you are, where you're from, really quickly, and then after that, we'll sort of talk a little bit about an agenda. So this is very informal, more like question and answer, although we do have some things at the beginning that we wanted to share, and then after that, we thought we would just kind of open it up for you to share some of the things that you've done. I know that many of you have written some reviews and have maybe sort of already figured out some ways that you kind of felt like you've been successful in doing that, so we want to share that. And then if you had any questions in general, we were going to do that. So maybe we could start over here.
Kimberly Heil, University of Illinois.
Lori Meyer, University of Illinois.
Minada, University of Illinois.
Mia McCullough, University of Washington.
Audra Clausen, University of Kansas.
Maria Ruiz, University of New Orleans.
Alicia Marajko, University of Pittsburgh.
Katie Snyder, Utah State University. Teresa Brown, Kent State University.
Nancy Gilly, Kent State University.
Elizabeth Echevarria, formerly University of Nevada, Reno. Julie Rutland, I was a student at University of Kentucky, and now I'm at Morgan State University.
Naomi Run, University of Minnesota.
Ann Mickelson from the University of South Florida.
Okay.
I'm Thane Barker. I'm from University of North Carolina at Greensboro.
I'm Elena Mihai, I'm from Indiana University.
Lois Purple from
Christine and Lori.
Oh, sorry.
You catch me eating? Oh my goodness.
Flip that camera over there.
I'm Mari Jean. I'm the managing editor of YDC. I'm the one that recognizes your names, guys.
She's the one that whispers into my ear.
So did we miss-
Oh, that's right.
Did we get everybody?
Christine did.
And Christine from Illinois.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they're having to videotape this early in the morning. But because they know that there are a lot of student members that can't make it to the conference, so they want to be able to put it on YouTube. Okay, and we had one more. We were just doing real
Emily.
quick introductions.
Hi,
Hi.
Go for it.
Just name and where you're from.
from New York City,
Great. Okay.
Fordham University.
Okay. Like I said, the first thing we wanted to do was just to talk about a couple of things, and some of these have to do with organization and formatting. So the first thing that I wanted to mention that yesterday I was in a meeting with Ami and Lori and Mike and some others was one of the ways that if you're on the student editorial board, and I guess it would be the same thing if you're a student guest reviewer, and maybe Lori can speak to this about how you go about doing it, but everything is now electronic. We get this template, we have a list that we look at, and on that list, by your name, it has several topical areas that you have checked in terms of either being your area of interest or your area of research. And I know for myself and for Mike that we use that when we go through and we're looking, okay, so who do we think, we got a particular manuscript, and let's say it's on transition, preschool transition. So we look at whatever people have indicated as those areas of interest or areas of research to choose the reviewers that we send the manuscript to. So the reason I'm bringing it up is for some of you, I noticed on there that there may be nothing there may be only one or two topical areas. And so my suggestion is if that's the case, you want to go back and you want to make that as broad as you possibly can, because if you haven't gotten a manuscript, it could be that, well, maybe you haven't identified an interest area, and so we're not sure when we get a manuscript if this would be something that would be appropriate to send to you. Did you want to add anything else about that?
I agree.
Okay.
It's
When you
really
go in
important.
as a reviewer, a guest reviewer, you've logged in, and so then when you get to that information part, you have the option of editing. So this is where you change your email address if you've graduated and you're moving on, or you decide, I really don't want things coming through the university, or whatever, that's where you'll edit that. But you'll also get a chance to put in topics, and like Mary-alyne said, if all you've chosen is autism, and I realize, you're living, eating and breathing it, that's great, but pick an age range. Say the 3 to 5s, or the 0 to 3s, or the families that are involved with that. So broaden yourself out, give them some other choices of things that you'd love to review.
All right. Any questions about that? I think Lori did a nice job explaining. Okay, the other thing that we wanted to bring up really quickly has to do with the mentoring piece of this. So in the beginning, I believe that there was a letter that went out that you had a mentor, maybe your faculty advisor, another faculty person, who in essence said that, we're going to help the student with this because the idea is that it's a learning opportunity for you. So we wanted to be sure that all of you understood, and we're assuming that when we get your review, that your mentor has somehow helped you with this, or that you've at least approached your mentor and said, well, I've done this review. Mentors handle this in different ways. I know faculty who will sit down and they'll do the review, and you'll do the review, and you'll sit down and you'll talk about it together, and others who might say, well, no, you do the review and come to me and let's take a look at it. So not so much concerned about the style, but the fact that to make it a learning experience and a learning opportunity for yourself, we want you to have that interaction with whoever that mentor was that said that they would sponsor you in this activity, so that truly is a learning opportunity. Are there any questions about that, or any concerns that you guys have related to that?
And trust me, I fielded questions from your professors that have emailed and said, okay, so how am I supposed to do this now? Do I give them a 1, 2, 3, or, how do we do this? So we field those questions all the time. So be sure you go through your mentor before you get that in for Mary-alyne or for Mike or for anybody.
And I think if they had questions, either Lori, Ami, people, be happy to sort of talk through what that is. I know everybody got a letter, but it's sort of hard sometimes in a letter to explain, or if somebody hasn't done this before, it's like, oh, what should this look like? So probably in many ways, it's just a conversation with your mentor about, how can we do this? Because again, it's meant to be a learning opportunity. Okay, to talk a little bit, I want to make a few points about the writing and the organization, and then I know that Bernie was going to share in particular sort of how she goes about reviewing, and then we were going to open it up to you guys to sort of share some of the things that you've done with everybody in terms of reviewing. The first thing is, it's professional etiquette and also I think good practice to begin any review with a paragraph that states, thank you for the opportunity to review this manuscript. So we want to start out very positive, and it is an opportunity because even those of us who aren't students, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to look at interesting things that are going on, and especially one of the reasons why I really like YEC is because it's practitioner-oriented. So it's really getting us an opportunity to look at, what are some things that practitioners are doing, and how can we translate the research into practice, into materials and ideas that are usable for people who are out there, on the ground running and doing the work. So it's always a good idea, and usually sort of talking about the fact, alluding to the fact if you can see the usefulness or the importance of this particular topic. So that's usually kind of a standard, doesn't necessarily matter how you do it, but kind of a standard way of opening your review. And if you've ever submitted a manuscript, or in the future when you do submit a manuscript, when you're on the other end of it as the person who submitted, you'll really appreciate the fact that somebody said, I recognize that you put some work in to creating this manuscript. So in essence, that's what you're doing is recognizing the work that they've done. So after you do that, the main thing in a review is to follow the guidelines. So we actually printed out a copy. I know in your letter that you either received a copy of it or were given a link to where it is on the website. And we just wanted to reiterate that essentially there are 3 areas that should be covered. And how you do that, I suppose, is really a matter of your own personal style. But I'll tell you as an associate editor, because our role, Mike and our role, and Sharon and the other associate editors, is we send it out, you review it, we get it back, we take a look at each of your sort of decisions based on your review. We kind of do our own review, but then it's up to us to make a decision. So at least for me, if how you organize is to, in essence, follow these 3 areas, if it's real clear to me, and some people actually, they will, use relevance of topic as sort of an introductory area, and then they'll talk about that, and then they'll put sound, theoretical, and research base, and they'll put strengths or suggestions related to that, and then quality of presentation. So I don't know that you exactly have to do it that way, but the more that you can organize it and make it obvious, and also this helps the author of that manuscript when they get it back. It clarifies for them exactly sort of what area are you pinpointing in terms of your comments and your constructive feedback that you're trying to give to them. So trying to be very clear that you've addressed those 3 areas. If you look at the guidelines, so relevance of the topic, so again what you're talking about is this useful to the YEC readership, and remembering that the readership of this particular journal, mainly practitioners. So putting your practitioner hat on and thinking about, well, if I was out there working, would this be useful to me? Is this an important area? Recommended practices, being sure that, because when we put this out, we're essentially saying, here's a recommended practice, and we want to be sure that we've linked back to that. Is it timely? Is it of interest? You want to say something about the theoretical and research base?
Yeah, I think it's really important that, we check as reviewers for what is the research base here, and does the manuscript address the research base? Because what we're really trying to do with this journal is take relevant research and evidence-based practice and put it in a format that is usable, reader-friendly. So I really take it seriously when people discuss research topics or evidence-based practice and make sure that those citations are there. We don't want anybody coming back and saying, oh, you talked about my research and I'm not cited, So you have to kind of read it in a sense of, it is a practitioner journal, but you also have to be careful about making sure that the person who wrote the manuscript cited the correct research and evidence-based practice.
Right.
It's important.
And I think that also is what separates this from being a magazine as opposed to a professional journal. So this is, yes, it's practitioner, the language may be a little different, so you're not gonna see statistics and qualitative and that kind of thing, but it still needs to be tied to the evidence. And in some ways, to be honest with you, I think it's almost harder to write for a practitioner journal than it is the other, because you're actually, what you're trying to do in your manuscript is translate that evidence into the kind of language and useful ideas that people can use. And sometimes that's hard because you're trying to sort of synthesize and winnow that down. But it's very important that that documentation and those citations be there, and that there is that evidence base and research base for it. Mike, I know I'm catching you off guard. Can you talk about quality of presentation? That's the third area on there.
We'll talk about this in the other presentation as well, but it's really, YEC has developed its own genre. And if you read it fairly regularly, you'll know that there's often a vignette that kind of guides the reader, kind of anchors the reader in a reality that they can relate to. So if I am an early childhood educator in a preschool classroom, and your title says that this is going to be about how to use best practices in that classroom, the vignette kind of anchors the reader into a situation that they can relate to and say, oh, I've had a child like that, or I've been in a situation like that with a parent, or I've had to do that assessment before. And I've had some of the difficulties that are sort of mentioned in the beginning of the vignette. How are they going to solve this? And it's sort of, the story is in there, and it reads like a story. And so I think sometimes with all of our APA and all of our scientific writing and all of our academic writing that we do, we're sort of told maybe implicitly to stay away from what would appear to be kind of flowery writing, or it's still early in the morning, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the words. Sort of that
That embellished narrative.
Yeah.
Embellished
the
narrative.
storytelling.
Creative narrative.
Yeah. Hemingway's got the line, good writing's not is architecture, it's not interior decoration, right? He wants you to keep the things that aren't needed out. But in YEC, you do need the story. The story anchors you and connects you to, and it's, I think there's sometimes, if you just go academic and you don't relate it to a real situation for people, it even can come off condescending. So you really want to let the reader know that you've had this experience, and they trust you a little bit more because you've described a situation that they can relate to. Does that make sense?
So I think when you're a reviewer, you want to be sure that that's coming across and that it's clear. Because I know sometimes what catches my eye is that people will have these interesting scenarios, but they're mentioning, the hypothetical names, but I'm like, well, so is Sarah the mom, or is that the child? I mean, so,
There's
and
an art
that's,
to it.
it's a different way of writing, so you want to be sure that those things are clear. And as a reviewer, again, you're sort of like, okay, did I understand this? Was this clear to me? Do I know who's doing what? And I guess the other thing as a reviewer is oftentimes we're asking them to weave that vignette throughout, so to link things back to the vignette as much as possible, because that's the sort of the storyline,
Yeah.
the plot, if you will, around which they're building whatever it is that they want to share, that particular thing. So anything else about the quality? You're looking at that, and I think here is where user-friendly can it be understood by a wide variety. So we're talking, family members may be reading this, practitioners, paraprofessionals may be taking a look at this as well. So yes, it's this style, but it's still professional. So it's still not, Good Housekeeping magazine kind of thing. It's not, we're not going in that direction. And then I think this is also where many of you have done this, and a lot of reviewers do this, including taking a look at APA style. So you could address it there, or at the very least, at the very end, always you want to come back to the actual writing style, the APA. So have they followed the APA style? Because that is something that is the responsibility of the authors when they submit the manuscript. The only other thing I wanted to say, so building your review around these guidelines, and these are what all reviewers, these are on there for all reviewers, it's not just students, but this is what we're asking all reviewers to do in terms of those three areas to take a look at the manuscript. And like I said, there are different ways organizationally to do it. I know I have a preference, or I found what's helpful to me as an associate editor, because when I get the reviews back, when I write my decision letter, I really like to pull out things from each reviewer that I think are very salient, and I like to be able to say, per reviewer 3, take a look at such and such, or reviewer 2 had some really good suggestions for whatever it was. And what helps me is when I get reviews back where the reviewers have, within their various 3 topics, they have somehow numbered or put a letter or something that I can say, look at item number 2 under quality of present, or whatever, however you organize it. But then that makes it easier for me, much more concise in my decision letter, and then I know that I pointed that author back in the right direction to some specific item. Because the other thing that we're trying to do with many of these authors is, if it hasn't come in where we're just going to, wow, we're going to accept this is perfect, and most don't, then we're trying to give them constructive feedback to help them create a better manuscript. So it's also, in essence, we're looking at this as a learning opportunity for these authors as well, when we give them this feedback. So anything that you can do that organizes it and then will help me to then be more explicit, to go back and point to certain items. So numbering is very helpful to me. I don't know if there's something in particular about that you wanted to share, Mike, as an associate editor.
Only not to be afraid to comment on the vignette as much as the academic aspect, part of the article. Feel free to help them rhetorically. Some people shy away from that, I feel, sometimes, and they only concentrate on the one part. But I like what you say about really addressing that and making sure that flows well.
Right. And then I think the other thing, too, is you want to think about, and this is what, you think, what can be so hard about a review? I know sometimes, and I'm almost embarrassed to say, it might take me hours to do a decision letter, and I'm thinking, why is it taking so long? And the reason it's taking so long is because this isn't about criticizing people or critiquing, but it's trying to give them positive feedback, and so it's trying to write it in a way that's constructive and that's positive and that's going to be helpful. Even if it's a decision to reject, revise, and resubmit. And sometimes that can be hard. So I would say when you're writing a review, I think you also want to point out in these various areas things that you see that are strengths, that you think this is a very positive aspect of this particular manuscript. And then talk about, but here's some questions that I have where I'm unclear, or here's some suggestions. So however you want to do that is fine, but I think, again, thinking about if you were the author of this manuscript and you got something back, you don't want to feel like you've been slammed or you've run into a brick wall. So because you put a lot of effort into it. People don't just make this up and send it in. They have put some effort. So I think you always thinking about starting out with what you see as positive, and then going to, okay, but I have questions, I'm not clear here, or here are some suggestions for ways to make this more clear. So not even just saying, I'm not sure what you mean, but if you think that there's something that would be much more concise if it were in a table or an appendix, or these are wonderful ideas, how is this linked back to your vignette or your scenario? So anything like that you can do, I think, is really, really helpful to the authors. And I know, having submitted manuscripts, they read those reviews. When they get the decision letter, you're not identified, you're identified by a number, reviewer 1, 2, 3. So they don't know who you are, but they read those and they take those seriously. So always thinking about that. And then usually always too, you want to, in some way, form or fashion, ask them to double check writing mechanics APA style. A lot of people, I think, they're so focused on the content that they forget sometimes to go back and just double check those things. And if the decision is to revise and resubmit or accept with revisions, you really want them to take that seriously, because when you read something and there's a lot of typos or APA is really messed up, you can get sidetracked. You can lose the content because you're like, oh my gosh, or the organization is kind of like, this doesn't flow. We were talking about this and now it's this. So you want to pay attention to that and give them some feedback to double check that and just remind them that that's important too, because if it's not organized and it's not easy to read, then your immediate reaction is going to be, this isn't it.
A couple things, I guess. It's not your job to devastate. I've been on the receiving end of devastating reviews, and it's
It's not
really
helpful.
what
No.
Mary-alyne said about it's a learning opportunity. But at the same time, I don't want you to be afraid to reject, because that's often the first thing that we get isn't ready yet. But it's as ready as, here's how I look at it, it's as ready as the author can do at this particular point. It's like one of those things, I can't even I can't even look at this thing anymore. I think it's in kind of good shape, but I need to let some reviewers look at it and help me see what I'm not seeing anymore. And then the reviewers, if they're doing it with the right tone, are certainly going to be critical in the best sense of that word, but they're not going to devastate. There are people out there who take on this job because I think they enjoy hurting other people, and I mean that. But that's not your job, and actually if I see that, then I'm going to make sure that I try to couch that so that it's not as devastating. I don't see that very much with YEC. YEC draws a pretty nice group of people. But be careful of your tone, because just as that red ink on the side that you get, and you're oh my gosh. As professors, we sometimes end up writing more than students write, just trying to help them back. And I remember in the beginning with my doc program, Jeanette was writing all over my papers, and I was like, oh, I must be terrible. But feedback really is a tough thing, but it's something that if you're wanting to be a professor in the future, you got to kind of get a handle on. This is a good exercise to do that.
And that's why I think I said sometimes it will take me much longer than what I think it
Yeah.
should, because again, trying to, not just the words, but the tone of this, and how you're relaying that information, and that can be challenging. So do you want to talk a little bit about your process as a
Yeah.
reviewer?
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah,
though?
going.
So just a rule that I've used before, when I review articles for other journals is I use the do unto others what you would like others to do unto you. And so the kind of review I would like to receive, I make sure I write that when I give it to others. Because if I get, and I've gotten some of those, like I have gotten reviews where they attack you personally. And you're going, who the heck are you? And how do you know who I am? And like, why do you think you can say that to me? And you as an author, you kind of like lose sight of what really is important about the changes that they're trying to make you do. So I always think about like, okay, if I were receiving this review, how would I write it? And if it's not a good review, how would I write it so that I would look at it and look at my work critically and then try to make those changes? But it's that belief, like, okay, what kind of review do you want to get yourself?
Yeah, so I think one of the nice things that I had was my advisor, Wischnowski, when I was a student, was actually at one point was co-editor of this journal, and so she had me review several articles as a student and really mentored me in the review process. We sat down and did several together, which I would highly recommend if you can get. If it's not your advisor, then whoever suggested that you be a reviewer, at least do one together, because I think it really helps you kind of understand how to do it, and it really gave me a feel for what do good reviewers do, and Nikki, of course, is an excellent reviewer and editor, so I kind of was very fortunate to have that experience for doing my first reviews for this journal. What I do now is I actually am old-fashioned. I print out the article, and I look at the line numbers, and I actually go through it very carefully the first time I read it through, make myself notes in the margins. I look at, tone, is it clear? I put on my practitioner hat. I was a practitioner for a long time, and I primarily teach undergraduates who are going to be practitioners. Most of them will be practitioners. So I think, what would one of my students say if I gave her this to read in a class? So I try to look for clarity, especially a clear voice. Who is the voice here? Do the vignettes make sense? Are they cohesive? If I read a vignette, do I understand, what the overall issue is or the problem is in the vignette? And then I always look for the research behind it and the evidence, because this is a journal. When this journal started, it was exciting to us, those of us in the field who've been in the field forever, because it was a way to take good research and good evidence-based practices and put them out there in a form that people actually want to read and use. So we really want to stress that let's make, this is a way to enhance the quality of services out there for kids and families. And this is probably the journal that most people will pick up and use if they're working in the field. And then I go back and read a second time. I look very carefully at APA. I look at, again, clarity. Does it make sense? And then I, kind of type my review and I save it. And I told Mary-alyne, I said, I would have brought one to, share with you, but I usually save it then and go back and read my review to me again and just sort of say, if I got this review, how would I feel? And, look for the tone and try to be positive, but also say, these are the things that I think could be improved. And I even sometimes say line numbers, look at line number 60 for this, or the child's name was misspelled 3 times in the vignettes. One day it's one page it's this spelled this way, another page it's so just little things like that you might pick up. But so it's time consuming. I mean, I'm not going to say that this is like, oh, easy read and send it off. I really try to put the time into because the authors have put a lot of time into it.
And I know, being on the other end too, of submitting manuscripts and getting the reviews back, their job is to look at those reviews. So the more concise and specific that you can be like that, particularly with those things, that is helpful to them, because then they can just take it and they can go back through and they can use the feedback and they can make those changes. So I think that's a good point as well. I wanted to mention something really quickly about the decisions and sort of how we arrive at those decisions. That's also on your handout, and then we'll open it up for you guys to kind of share the things that you've been doing that you've found helpful for yourself. Essentially, there are 4 decisions. Accept with revision, which, again, according to the guidelines, is basically, this manuscript is in really good shape. There aren't a lot of substantial changes, but there's still some things that, accept without revision means we're ready to go. This is near as perfect as it's going to get. Accept with revisions indicates that, yes, we think it should be accepted, but there are some areas that have been delineated in the reviews that we really need to see changed. And there's some very specific things about that. Usually what happens if that's the decision, it doesn't necessarily go through the full revision process, although, again, that's a decision that's made by the associate editors. If we want to send it out, typically we send it out to 3 reviewers, one of which is on the student editorial board or a student guest reviewer. But if we would like to, even if it's accept with revision and we want to send it out to you all again, all 3, we can do that, so we have some choice. Or reject, revise, resubmit. And I guess, I know we had this discussion yesterday that even as editors and associate editors, we look at that a little differently. A lot of times, it's almost, for me, that's, I don't see the reject so much as I see revise and resubmit. And usually, in my decision letter, I'll indicate that, I hope you will consider, I think this topic is very timely, it's of interest to the readership, but there were some concerns about whatever it was, and I might list those or pull those together in a summary. So, I don't know, Mike, how you kind of look at that. Do you more or less the same way?
Same way, although
Okay.
that word reject is a tough word. I mean, when I was a junior in high school, this girl, no, I won't go. But it has that sort of power to it, that reject, and that's what people kind of concentrate on. But it's a learning experience, and it's the revise and resubmit. Hopefully people see the encouraging part in your comments, so that they recognize, okay, they're not taking it now, but they still want me to kind of work on this and make it better. And I would say that's the majority of the things we receive. They're not ready yet, but they're on their way. And here's how you can make it better. That's your job, is to help them see that.
And then lastly, the reject, and in many instances, what that is about, non-acceptable publication, oftentimes I think if somebody hasn't read the journal, they may not have a sense of who this readership is, and so it could be just simply a matter, and even when we send a decision letter about reject, if that's the case, often we'll say, well, you might want to consider such and such a journal and their readership. So a lot of times that's the rejection letter. So we want you, as Mike said before, it's hard because there's still a certain amount of subjectivity to this. But, to not, if you truly think that, this, based on your review, that this simply is not something that would be of interest, and it's not in the shape, and you don't think it's gonna get into shape, then that's the decision that you put. And what happens then is that it comes back to us as associate editors, and my process, I'm sort of like Bernie, I'm old-fashioned. I'll print it out, and before I look at the reviews, most of the time, I will look, a lot of times I'll look at the decision, but I won't read the reviews, and then I'll read the manuscript myself and kind of come to my own, have my own thoughts about what I think about it, and I'll mark it up like Bernie does, almost sort of from the reviewer perspective. And then I'll go back and look at the reviews, because my job is to essentially make that decision using the information I've gotten from the reviewers. And I also, what I like to do once I make that decision, it's kind of tough sometimes though, because sometimes you'll get all three people, it'll be a different decision, and so you're sitting there going, whoa, okay, this was reject, revise, resubmit, and accept with revisions. Okay, so let's see, what do we think here? So then I go back and I really look at the reviews and try to, in the body of the decision letter, once I've sort of said this is the decision, is to then try to synthesize across the three reviews the things that I think are strengths, and then here are areas of suggestion. And for me, what I found is many of these manuscripts are the revise and resubmit. And so I really like I said, the reason I like it when people number, because then I can, in my sort of synthesis, I can go back and be very specific about, see what reviewers said about item number 2, quality, because oftentimes you're giving them some really good suggestions and things, and you'll see a lot of the reviewers will oftentimes give the same kind of suggestion. So my job is to try to synthesize and pull that together and give that to the author. And having been an author myself, I know that, we take that seriously, and we do try to go back and look, and if you can be concise and specific, because I know sometimes I've gotten reviews and I'm like, I honestly don't know what they were talking about there. I can't see it. It was so sort of broadly, the review was very broad, and I'm like, well, I'm serious about making these revisions, but I just really don't understand what it was. So being as specific about some of those things and concise is really helpful. I don't know, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we open it up to students?
Only, sometimes I've gotten reviews back, and I think they're from students that are really, really short and very general, and they're not very helpful, to be honest. You need to be more thorough in your responses.
No, I ditto that at the very least, if you're following these guidelines, there's gonna probably be at least 3 paragraphs.
Yeah.
And, really, like you say, the more specific, when you see things, your job is to help that person make this manuscript better in any way they can with your suggestions. So, question or something you wanted to add?
I think probably some of us go to the style that our professors do, go to our mentors. And if our mentors do an accept with revisions, that's the second one, right?
Mm-hmm.
The accept with revisions, we feel like that's good enough. I just need to tell them accept with revisions, and the editor will tell them everything they need to do. So, like Mary-alyne said, you actually do need to know what you want revised. So just accept it. If there are very few that come in that are straight accept, nothing needs to be done. We know that from our own papers, right? Nothing's perfect. So find the imperfections that you would like them to revise, and be sure you include that in your 3 paragraphs.
And in some ways, you're actually justifying your decision.
Yes.
If you are saying, this is accept with revision, even if it's accept, tell us why. Why is it that because that's gonna help the associate editors to say, okay, yeah, I can see why they are accepting this without any revisions, or I can see why they're rejecting it. And usually you'd like to, you kind of start out almost with a summary. It's unfortunate that this topic is really interesting. Unfortunately, I cannot accept this because there's these 1, 2, 3, 4 things that I don't like about it, and then you go into more specifics. But it's what you're doing is you're justifying that decision that you've made in your review in many ways too.
So, Lori, yeah, sharing some things you guys have done.
Yeah, I'd like to share 3 things that I found really helpful over this past year. So the first thing, whenever I get an opportunity to do a review, I immediately forward that email to my faculty advisor and I say, oh, I got a YEC article, do you want to read it with me? And she usually always loves reading the articles and giving feedback. And we've kind of done this developmental continuum where the very first article we reviewed, we both read it, we both wrote out some feedback, we met together, I wrote the review, she read my review, she edited it, she revised it, and then I submitted it. And then now we're at a point where we both read the article, we both come up with points, and we discuss it, and then I write the review independently, and I send that forward. But it's been a process from very hands-on, a lot of feedback, to me doing it more independently, but still being like, I think this is a reject, revise, resubmit, but what do you think? And it always makes me feel so much better to know someone's thinking the same thing I do, especially when we read the editor's letter and seeing what all the other reviewers say. So that's been really helpful. The other thing that I've done is I created a Word template. So I used this as my guide, and I just created a Word document that I have 3 paragraphs for each of these things, and then all of the points within it, I create bullet points underneath it, like, is this timely, question mark? Is this a relevant, question mark? Do they cite recommended practices, question mark? And then I just use that as like a little prompt for me, and that's how I write it, and I save that template, and every time it's time to review, I open that template, and I just use that to guide me. And then the third thing is there's one article that I've read 3 times now. So just because it's a revise and resubmit, and I feel like I can recite this article in my sleep.
Yeah.
But it's been really great to read the same article over and over again and to see it change and progress. So if you have the opportunity would you like to review this again? I highly recommend you take that chance because it's a good process to see.
That's a really good point, we forgot to bring up. So you do have, when you submit your review, you can indicate yes or no, that you'll take a look at it. And I agree with Lori that, particularly for many of these decisions, is I want to go back to the same reviewers because you saw the original, so you're in a better, you have the context to know, so what improvements, and did they actually take your suggestions and the reviewers' suggestions to heart? So usually, unless you just feel really strongly that you never want to see this again, saying, yes, I'll, agree to read it again is very helpful, I know, as an associate editor, because I really depend a lot on the reviewers, and I feel my role is more of a sort of synthesizing all that and then kind of making that decision, so that's great. Other people?
I'll just echo what Lori said. I really admire the developmental process that we've had. I had a little different experience where I did it independently, and then my advisor sat down and we had a discussion about what I had found and things like that. And it was that decision level of what is this. And your discussion earlier helps me a lot because it sounds like, just for clarification, I guess, the reject is really reserved for manuscripts that really aren't a good fit for YEC. I mean, maybe somebody submits a pretty heavy research article, if they accidentally chose YEC for something with heavy stats or something.
I think that's certainly one of them. I do think that there's some manuscripts where if you believe that could be that, but also it's like this just, the topic wouldn't seem to be of interest, and
Or it's just so
you're looking, it's so poorly, so I know that a person has to go a really long way to get a rejected from me, I guess. Just because I see this, and I think the tone that Ami as editor has set for this journal is that we do have many different peoples in different roles, including practitioners submitting to this journal, and that we want to be as helpful as possible. But there are those times when, yes, it is just for those reasons.
But I appreciate the added clarification on the different levels. That helps me a lot. And then I'll echo, I did the same thing in terms of I don't have a template, but I look to the wording of those things, and I actually use some of the wording, like, oh, yes, this is very important. And that helped me, especially the first time, to just know how to phrase things and things
Absolutely. And then the more that you do it when you're systematic like that, then it becomes, you can do it, you're more efficient at doing it because you get into this, okay, I've got my way of organizing it, be it checklist, however you do that, and then you've got this process and you get a little bit quicker and more efficient at doing it. And I also think that by doing it, you learn a lot about your own writing. And, you know, and it influences you that way, so that's why it's such a wonderful opportunity, I think, to do the reviews and to be on that side of things, because then it's like, whoa, now I know why my professor was saying this about when I wrote that. I mean, you see it from a different perspective, and it's very powerful.
Right, and I looked at it as that too, because I did the same thing that Rose said, in the sense that I wanted to get, and I'm somebody that loves really detailed feedback, and I crave it. And so I even used the line numbers, so if I had a suggestion, I said, page 4, line 26.
No, it's,
So hopefully that's helpful and doesn't make people think that they're horrible.
and I think particularly when there's typos, or even if there's something that is like, ooh, you know, that's, is that IDEA, is that best practice? Ooh, you know, go back and look at that again. Then being very specific, that's what the lines are there for, so that you can, if there's something like that that's like, whoa, you know, you need to take a look at that, then you can zero right in on what that is. Yeah. Anybody else? Oh, come on.
I have a question regarding the levels of accept and reject, because the one document I was reading, or our manuscript, I was between reject, revise, and resubmit, and accept with revisions. And so I know there's, in some cases, maybe kind of a fine line there. Do you have any advice for how to look at that?
We had this debate yesterday about the exact same thing. I think it's very, it's very difficult. For me, it's more a matter of, I guess, the extent of the revisions or the reorganization or whatever it is that would make the difference. Now, it's funny because I laugh because yesterday when we were having this discussion with the associate editors, Mike sees the first word he sees is reject, the first word I see is revise.
Yeah.
So some of it, I think, is just almost a personal in how you look at it. So, but again, it has to be, your decision really should be reflected in the review that you've written. So whatever, you know, so, and it's a matter of degree. So I think, I don't know that there's a good answer to that. I don't know if you
I
have
think
any more.
Except with revisions, there's some cleanup to be done, but it's not any kind of major structural part of the problem, or any worried about a best practice issue, or it's mostly probably APA and some writing mechanics, and maybe just, you know, make sure you connect this part of the vignette to that part of the vignette. You introduce a character and we don't know who she is or what she does exactly for this child, that type of thing. If there's just some little minor things, then I need to have those revisions taken care of, but you're in pretty good shape here. So, but reject, revise, resubmit, that usually says to me, you still got quite a bit of work to do, and you're really gonna have to think really much harder about what you need to do here to make this right, if that helps. There's an art to it, it's not perfect.
For me, it was the second revision, like it had been revised once, so it was the second time, and that's when I was kind of really struggling with it.
That's hard, and I, as an associate editor, because that's very hard, because then you're at that point, it's like, okay, so we're not gonna go through this 5 times. So where is the point at which you say, okay, you know, it's improving, but it still hasn't quite improved enough, and it's just a really tough decision. And I'm like Mike, it is a difference between sort of like, accept means, you know, we got some minor things here, where to me it's the revise and resubmit is that, you know, it could be organization, it could be tables, it could be something that you missed related to best practice, it could be that, you know, you didn't cite enough of the research base, and I really need to see more of that, and that's very critical. So it's things that are more substantial kinds of things that you want to see changed, as opposed to little minor, even if it's minor APA or, you know, a few typos or this or that, like you say, is a clarification. So that's, and then again, the nice thing about the review process is that there, at least I think what we've been doing is 3 reviewers. So there are 2 other people out there who are also reviewing, and so when we get those reviews back, then at least we've got multiple sources from which to sort of say, okay, let's see what we think, and then how can we pull this together in a decision for the author. So that's probably clear as mud, but it's tough. It's tough. Other questions or sharing? Yeah.
Question A, On average, how many times do you have authors revise and resubmit? I know you did 3 so far with this.
You know, some of that really depends, for me, it depends on the topic. If I think something is just really, boy, this is a hot topic right now, and we haven't had very much of it in the journal, then I might, the decision might be a second time to revise and resubmit if it looks like they're heading in the right direction. I know I'm the editor working with Lori on this particular one, which is actually, it was, after the second revision was an accept with revisions, accept with revisions. And so I actually asked Lori to take another look, because I wanted to be sure. What was important to me is before, when it's an accept decision, before I send it to Ami as the editor, I want to be sure it's in the best possible shape it can be. So it's no longer, you know, we've been through it with a fine-tooth comb, and the author has used the suggestions, and it's a good manuscript, and maybe there's some minor things that Ami may have to deal with once that she gets it. But so a lot of times I will ask my reviewers to look at it again, even if it's been accept with revisions, because they've been the ones looking at it, and I want them almost to like get it, set it aside maybe for a day or two, and then look at it again and just double check that the things that were suggested actually got in there, and that they're satisfied that all of their suggestions were used, and that this is a better manuscript. I've got one now that's, I would say, maybe this is on, because of the topic, been trying to work with the author. I'm not sure what the decision is going to be. It could be that after this time, I think maybe this is the third time, and that's unusual for me. I mean, at some point you have to decide either, yes, this is a go, and we think it's close enough, or no, you know, you've tried to do it, and we've tried to help, but just still is just not going to make it. And I've only had that happen once, and it isn't with the one that I'm talking about with Gloria.
I recently reviewed one, and I went through the process with my advisor, and we worked very well together. So she said, okay, I'll read it, you read it, we'll each write our review, and then we'll kind of swap and see, and we'll review each other's review.
Yeah.
And that was very good, because I had the opportunity to read her review and say, you're gonna kill this person. You cannot write this for her, because being my advisor, I know that sometimes she can be a little too forceful, but it's different when you're doing a dissertation, that
Right.
way you are,
Right.
you know, reading something that somebody, maybe a practitioner, submitted to a journal, and it's that person's first experience.
Right.
So when she does that with me, I appreciate it. But I was trying to put myself in the place of the person writing this and say, this is for somebody who doesn't know you personally, this is a little much. So it was a very interesting process for us. And we didn't agree on the decision. I wanted to do a reject, revise, and resubmit, but she wanted to reject. And in the end, I decided to go with her advice and reject. But her point was, this is going to take so many reviews to get it there, because we both agreed the topic was good. I could see as a practitioner, the ideas were helpful, but it really lacked that strong research background, and we thought the writing style, the person really had to do some work with the writing. So for her, she just kept thinking it's just going to take so much work for them to get this article to the point where it can be published. While the way I looked at it was, but if this person can get it done, it's going to be useful to practitioners.
You know, and it really depends, because it also depends on, if you're the author and you get back this reject, revise, and resubmit, the extent to which because I've had some authors who get it back and then they send back the revision, and you're like, so I don't see my suggestions in here anyway. So it kind of depends on them and what they put into it in terms of then what is that revision that comes back. So it's a fluid process. The other thing I wanted to bring up when you said that, though, is that there is a place in the review where you can submit comments directly to us as the associate editor that the authors do not see.
And that's what I did.
Yes, and if you write, you can put something, that you want to be confidential because maybe it is your concern about something or question about something, but it's not necessarily something that needs to go in the review or you want the author to see because you're just trying to clarify something or you're like, well, I did this and here's why, but, here was my real feeling or my concern about it. So, and that is just, isn't it just said notes to the editor?
It says it's the editor.
Okay, so that's something that no one else sees besides the editor. So
Well, I
if,
see it.
well,
but
you see
yeah.
it, but not the author, so,
No,
not
it's
the other
not.
reviewers,
Yeah, the
so
other
that way, if
reviewers
you
don't
feel
see
like
it.
there's something that, I can't quite figure out, but I'm not, not sure about this or whatever it was, or my concern is, I gave this feedback, man, there's lots of points in here that don't seem to be recommended practice, and I'm really wondering about that or something, you can certainly use that, yeah.
And in the end, that's what I did. We did reject it, but I did write a note saying, I'm choosing to reject this at this point, but I can see that this is probably a practitioner in sharing ideas or something
And
like
you're
that.
absolutely right, we do get practitioners that, speech therapists that decide they've got a really good thing, and they're not necessarily really into early childhood special ed, so they don't have the right
They
speak
don't
for
have
us.
the scholarly writing,
Right.
process down.
Right.
And so I just wrote a note saying, if you choose to allow this person to revise and resubmit, I'll be happy to review it again because I wasn't convinced that we should just reject it at the first time. So it's good to know that changes can go either way. People
It's rare for at least my experience has been, it's rare for them to get to a third reject, revise, resubmit. That's kind of an unusual case. Most of the time, if it's a revise, resubmit, you get to the second time and then the editors say, okay, enough is enough. We can either polish this or we can't polish this. And they kind of make that decision at that point, so.
Yeah, because, you reach that point where it's like, we could go at this forever, and it's just probably not gonna happen, and it's not fair to anybody, it's not fair to the author, it's not fair to the,
They've kept it
yeah.
off the plate, off of
Right.
every other
Right, because they're not
journal,
submitting it
too.
anyplace
Right.
else, because they're thinking that this is gonna go here, so, yeah. But, it's very tricky, and, there'll be sometimes, there've been at least one occasion where I thought to myself, maybe that just should have been a reject, but it's sort of like, that, you move on, it's water over the bridge, we're doing this now, but we're not gonna extend this forever. But we do wanna, oftentimes I lean more, let's give them a chance.
Yeah.
Because, and it could come back, boy, if you have really pointed comments and suggestions, and they take that to heart, and all of a sudden, it clicked for them, wow, then that revision could be just, wow, they did it, or it could be the other. I mean, there's just a responsibility on their part in terms of using those suggestions and pulling it together. Somebody had,
Thank you so much for sharing, because I had the same thing where I was feeling it should be reject and resubmit, and my advisor pushed me towards just a flat out reject, but it came back. So that made me feel so bad. And I got to read it again, and it made great changes, and it was accepted. So just also, I think it was good for me to know that just because I say reject doesn't mean that that's final.
Right.
And I was so happy to see it come back.
Now, I think it helped me really be more forgiving of the reviews I get, or the reviewers that read my work, because I have had work rejected and they reject and resubmit, and it's very confusing because I've had some where one reviewer says everything's wonderful, this is just great. I would just like to see more examples of this. So it's, no, I can't just add a couple sentences and it'll be done. And then the next reviewer completely trashes my work. And it's, I can't believe it's the same manuscript that these two people read. But going through the process, it's just helped me see this is not an easy job, and it's really, some people are less tactful than others, and it may just be that some of these reviewers did not have a lot of time to to spend just trying to make it sound nicer, but they were just trying to give feedback. But But after you read something so complimentary, when you read something that sounds so negative in comparison,
Right, right, you're like,
it can be very painful to you as somebody who's trying to learn how to do this. So.
Right.
There was an exercise in my doc program where I think the whole class had an opportunity to review the same article together.
Yeah.
We all wrote our own review.
Yes.
And,
Yeah, I did that. Yeah, we
And
did
then we
that.
read our articles out loud to each other, or we traded back and forth and so forth. And there was some calibration that was kind of nice in that exercise, so that we could see how other people saw things, and then how to sort of shape it so that it wasn't as sharp as it could be, but it was still good feedback for that person to make good changes. So if you need another assignment, ask your professor to do that with you. But it actually was really a good exercise, and I got more confident in my review writing.
Well, and that's why the process involves 3 reviewers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because people they come at these things with different perspectives, and so, but then I feel like it's my job then to sort of look at this and try to pull and synthesize and ultimately make the decision, which way are we going on this. So it's very helpful to us, the fact that, it's not just me making the decision, but I got 3 reviewers that I can look at and see what were some of the things, and then what is my feeling about it, and what should I think that decision should be. Other people, I thought I saw other hands sharing your process or questions.
Well, the previous discussion reminded me of a question I have about the online review submission.
Uh-huh.
Because it wasn't clear to me necessarily whether, after I drafted my review, if I was supposed to submit it to the section that's exclusively for the editor, or submit it to the author.
Lori, that sounds like a question for you, because
It's
it's about the template
They're like
itself.
2 boxes, right? One is directly to the editor and one is my review. So it would be the second box where you put that, unless you
The
want,
comments to the author of the paper.
it will go eventually.
But it goes for the editor first.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay,
It
so that
all
was what
goes
was
through.
unclear to
Yes.
me about that, because I was pretty sure that.
Even though it
I
says
didn't
comments to
know if
the
that
author,
was
but it
reserved-
comes back to us for the
Yeah.
decision.
Right,
They
and
see-
you,
Yeah.
and the template combines everybody's review and she gets a chance.
But that's a very good question. That other box, that's sort of the more confidential, where you're like,
Well, and it actually says that confidential to the editor.
so.
And I didn't know if the box
Yes.
to the author was something that was meant, with separate comments.
You
that-
wouldn't have actual access to the author,
Right,
honestly.
yeah,
So,
okay.
The other thing too, and I think I heard some people talk about this, and I've learned this the hard way with electronic templates. I usually type my stuff up in Word and then cut and paste back
That's
into
what I
it,
do
because
too. Yeah.
that way, you talked about saving
save
it.
'em.
You go back, you look at it again before you actually cut and paste it in there, and actually because I know we had one reviewer about a year ago, something happened in the system and it didn't go
she
through,
went
and
away
she
from
lost,
it.
she went away from
Some of
it,
the information in.
and it didn't
And
save.
said I couldn't finish it right then, so I came back and.
And she had spent hours, and so she was pretty upset.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, do it in Word and cut and paste
Cut and
this
paste.
time. So, yeah, you don't wanna learn the lesson the hard way.
Yeah.
Use everything before you do. Other great questions and great comments. Anybody else? Yeah.
And this is probably a silly question. I'm not a reviewer, but I would like to be one. What are the steps that I need?
Dr.
I have some
Lori is
slides
managing
here.
editor, so she
Actually,
can tell you
one
about
of them
that.
is, the YEC monograph. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the monographs, I'm hoping you are. We've got a new one coming called Addressing Young Children's Challenging Behaviors. There's a reviewer sign up for that particular thing. I will also put a reviewer sign up out for YEC in general, if you want to be a guest reviewer. What we will do is for the student editorial board, it comes up under review once a year. So if that's what you're thinking as a student or as a guest, you can choose which one.
And we do have student guest reviewers.
Yes.
That are not on
Yes.
the student editorial board.
Is there an
So-
application process that I would go through?
Just talk to Lori.
I'll talk to
We'll
you guys.
just- yeah.
Okay.
And when you say put those out, are you gonna just put it
I'm
on the
going to
table?
start this around, so,
Oh, okay.
that one is for YEC. I'm going to change the top of this one to say,
But I think even the expectation, if you're a student guest reviewer, not necessarily on the student editorial board, that you're still working with your mentor, so that it's a learning
Yeah,
opportunity.
needs to be.
Yeah, learning experience. Anybody else, questions or ideas? Or, yeah, the
So
sun
bright in
is.
here now, it's,
Yes,
Yesterday it was mentioned that we were supposed to like see other reviewers' feedback as well as ours when we, after we submitted it.
yes, and and you didn't get that?
No.
Okay, there was a glitch in the system. I love electronic systems.
What is really interesting is, I'm the template woman, I guess, apparently, but, we had it set up in the system and Sage really worked hard to figure out why this is doing this, because we had the option of either we send the review to the reviewer, or we send the reviews to the author. We didn't have a choice of,
The decision letter.
we could only do one or the other, and they finally figured out, we need to uncheck a box. So, we're set now, and if you didn't receive the other reviews that were done at the same time, you should be.
I would say that if you've done that, and let's say a month has gone by and you haven't gotten anything electronically that was the decision letter that included the reviews, then email directly your associate editor that sent it to you and say, I haven't gotten it, because that's how we discovered that it wasn't happening. I didn't know that the reviewers were not getting what they were supposed to get, and it wasn't until somebody said, well, I never got the reviews, and now you're asking me to read it again. I'm like, what? This was supposed to happen electronically, and the system itself, there was a glitch, and we didn't even know until somebody brought it up. So that could very well have been what had happened with you, and on our end of it, we assume it's working as it should, and sending it out. So yes, if that's happened to you, then I think your best bet is to email the associate editor directly and just say, I never got that back. Because we need to know at our end, so we can go to Lori and say, something's not working.
and if you don't hear back from that associate editor, email Ami.
Yeah.
Okay. That's kind of what I did when I got like 3 reviews in 3 days. It was like, something's wrong with your system.
With the system.
Just letting you know.
And actually, what we should do here is for Lori to clarify. Lori's the managing editor, so you want to clarify a little bit what your role is as managing editor?
No, I field a lot of the emails, honestly. When there's the glitches, for example, when an author says, I can't get it to uptake my PDF, my article's not coming in. So they can send it to me and I can go and add their article or their tables or whatever. But when the article first comes to me, I get an automated email that says, you have mail, essentially. So I go and I look and see that it's going to be able to be blind reviewed. In other words, their name's not anywhere present. And that the pictures or the tables are appropriate for our journal. So then that then goes to Ami, who disperses the article out to the associate editors. The associate editors then say, I need to pick 3 reviewers, and students get 1, and then there are 2 others usually. So then the article goes out. Now, in the process time, sometimes we need, an author will get a reject, revise, resubmit, and the author says, can't make it in that amount of time, I'm having a baby. It's really important for me to, focus on this. And I really have had that, so that wasn't made up. So, it's one of those things that you say, okay, well, we can reset the clock, and do you think you can have it by the end of November instead of early November? And so we can go in and reset things like that. Same thing on reviewers, because you'll get that automated message that says, you haven't gotten your review in. Honestly, I doubt students are really the ones that are not getting their reviews in. But you get that message that says, I don't have my review in yet. I really kind of need to hurry about that. Don't panic, but get it in. We'd like to get a timely turnaround for people. Does that help? I have the sign-up thing here. If you are not a student or not a guest reviewer at this point in time, sign up. If you're already in our system, you're already in our system. So you don't need to sign up again.
And I wanted to ask a quick question. Of those of you that are here that are on the student editorial board, have you all had at least one opportunity to review at least one manuscript? Okay, because that was my concern. I know a few months ago that there was some questions that, like, has because
I
everybody
think
had a
Almy
chance.
actually went into the system and
Okay.
checked.
Okay, and
You know,
checked, all right.
You guys
I
are
want to make
flagged.
sure that, that everybody has that opportunity. Because that was another aspect of the system for us. We can see like who's got one out or who's reviewed within the last 12 months. And so we also want to kind of spread that opportunity
Sure,
around to different people.
But seriously, go in and change your topics.
Yeah.
You know, or check your topics
Yeah.
at least, you know, because
You wanna
quite honestly,
broaden it a
just,
little
you
bit?
might have been that preschool teacher, but you know, that's not really what your dissertation's on. So go back in and you're qualified to do that part. So put your name out there
Great.
for it.
Other questions or anything else? No, that's all we got. All right, very good.